You're making this so easy, I'm actually getting worse.
Hello everyone, my name is Blackwatch and welcome to another episode of How to Master. And in this week's episode we're taking a look at Sebastian Cote, also known as Buck. He's a 2-armor, 2-speed attacker and he's a member of the JTF2, that's the Joint Task Force 2 CTU from the Great White North in Canada. And he has 2 primary weapons, the C8 SFW AR, which is my recommended weapon because it's ridiculous, especially on console now. It's been buffed, so give it a go. Especially with that 1.5. Spicy stuff. And the Kamer's DMR, which used to be lovely, but the fact that you can only have either a 1x or a 3x is just not good enough for me, so leave that one in the house. If you like the videos, subscribe, drop a like, share, all that stuff, and check out the other ones. Got plenty of guides and plenty of guides coming up, so hope you enjoy it. His secondary weapon, he only has one, is the Browning High Power Mark 1 9mm pistol, and it's perfectly reliable, pretty decent damage actually for a high cap, and you know, it does the job. Good gun. And in between of most average pistols. Secondary gadgets, he gets either flashbangs or the hard breach charge. For me, it's got to be the hard breach charge. Flashbangs are just not reliable enough, and there's plenty of burn for Jaeger things and magnets nowadays, so I feel like having that hard breach charge gives you some options that you otherwise wouldn't have, and it's nice to be able to get hatches that you otherwise would not be able to get, so go for that. And his unique gadget is the SK 4-12 skeleton key underbarrel shotgun. This is mainly a breaching tool, but in terms of its lethal capabilities, I believe it's the most lethal shotgun at point blank range. I know that's kind of silly because all the shotguns are lethal at point blank range, but this one, I think, hits the hardest out of them all. It has the most pellet damage, it's like 60 or something like that. The trade-off is that it drops off very, very fast, so use this in a pinch if you've got to clean someone up, but know that you're not going to get the mileage out of it that you would with another shotgun once you go beyond that like 8 meter range. So keep them close and you can rip them up, but otherwise, yeah, stick with the AR, it's there for a reason. But it has 5 rounds in the mag with 1 as a little chamber secret, so you can have 5+1 basically. This is a roundabout way of saying that. And you get 25 rounds in reserve as well, or shells in reserve I should say. So he basically brings to the table unparalleled shotgun destruction. You know, you take a shotgun from the regular sort of setup of shotguns that you can get in Siege and put it next to the skeleton key. The skeleton key doesn't just win the prize, it runs away with the prize and then breaks down your garage to go and celebrate with your mum. It's a mad shotgun for breaking down walls and all that kind of stuff, and it can be lethal up close. So his strengths: vertical play. He is very good at vertical play, particularly from the bottom up, so he does very, very well shooting up at ceilings. And who else can do that? Zofia? Ash? Can they do it as often as Buck can? No. Can Sledge do it? No, not unless he's got a very athletic vertical leap. And unfortunately he doesn't have that, so yeah, Buck is the king of vertical destruction, especially from floors to ceilings. And he has a large amount of breaching capability that he can perform very quickly, so he can really basically just destroy more soft walls than anyone else can in the shortest space of time, because he has 6 rounds of, you know, hole making I'll rephrase that. He has 6 rounds that can make big holes in walls very quickly, and you can fire them with a pretty fast rate of fire. So if you are at the right ranges, you're making rotations that are bigger than a sledge hole. So it's pretty good, and it's fast, and you have many, 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 many options because of the 25 rounds there, or shells. Don't want to get reminded. Don't know why I said that, no one ever reminded me. I just remind myself. And because he has the shotgun on top of the hard breach charge, it means that he's versatile. He can, if he needs to, take those engagements on up close. If he's run out of ammo or whatever else he'll need a shotgun for. And he has the hard breach charge so that he can do things that other soft breachers cannot do, because they can't deal with hard situations. By hard situations, I mean reinforced things. I'm not getting my phrasing right at all today. He has a really good AR. Really, really good AR. The C8 SFW is crazy. It is he's the only guy that has this just now, but there are many people who are talking about buffing Warden or buffing Nook, and that gun is on the list almost every time in terms of people's suggestions, because it's just madness, especially now on console, so definitely worth using. He is a character that enables many attacks to actually happen when they otherwise couldn't without him. Obviously Zofia and Ash can do those things. When I'm referring to these attacks, I'm meaning, you know, places where the breach denial is quite hard to reach, and in this current meta when Thatcher is banned all the time and Kali sucks, it does help to have someone who can go underneath a site and just clear it out quickly and efficiently, and that tends to be what his role is a lot of the time, is to get those things out without causing any problems for himself and the rest of the team. And again, big strength, he is the ceiling remover. If you want a ceiling gone, he will make it gone very quickly, and he won't ask any questions about why it needs to go. It's insane. But yeah, he basically hinges, a lot of attacks hinge on him being there, and because he has that level of necessity, he's definitely worth bringing along as a result, even without his frag grenades. But we'll move on to those weaknesses now anyway. Obviously his main contender is Sledge in most situations, because they're the most easily comparable characters in the game, I would say. They're both the specialist soft breachers. Obviously Sledge has a hammer, so he has to be close to the walls, but in this particular 1v1, he, I would say, is better at floor destruction than Buck is. Reason being, floor destruction with Buck can sometimes be a little bit finicky. There is a bad habit of the Gadget only taking out one side of the floor, so it will take out the side that you're on and not the ceiling below on certain places. It tends to be when you have a mixture of materials, so if you have wood on one side and plaster on the other, this can happen. It's very frustrating when it does happen, but it's not something that always makes sense, but it does come up more often than you would think. A lot of it's to do with your positioning. If you can get yourself at the right angles, then you're fine, but if you can't, then you can end up using a lot of charges very quickly. I say charges, I mean shells. A lot of shells very quickly, where they're not actually doing a lot to help the team out, because you're just having to spend them on the same spot multiple times. So Sledge kind of wins on that particular one, even though he's a bit slower on getting them. He doesn't have any frags, which obviously Sledge does, so that's something you could talk about. But again, Sledge doesn't have anything to deal with reinforcements, so it's a 50-50 there. I could argue that frags are better, especially when you can make the holes to do it. Buck worked very well with them, but that's a conversation for another day. He can't deal with bulletproof gadgets. This is a big one. So if you run into a Maestro, or you have anyone who's using anything that's going to be a big problem for the team and is bulletproof, you're not going to have that backup there when it comes to Buck, because he cannot shoot these things because they are bulletproof, unfortunately. Whereas Sledge can just give them a smack with a hammer, Zofia and Ash can shoot them. He just doesn't have anything to deal with that anymore, which does make him a little bit more wary of a pick. But apparently we're getting something to deal with bulletproof gadgets in the future, so we'll just have to see how that plays out. Sometimes his breach holes on a horizontal setting can be a little bit dodgy, especially if you're working with plaster. Plaster is a difficult material to work with as Buck, because ultimately your destruction is based on the pellets, and if you don't get the ranges right, the impulse created by each individual pellet is not going to be enough to break a big chunk of the wall, and instead it will break smaller individual pieces of the wall for every pellet that hits the wall. That's the situation you want to avoid, but it's not as easy to avoid with plaster. So you need to kind of maybe double tap, even sometimes triple tap a wall to make a hole actually usable, and obviously the more time you have to spend with your shotgun out when there's people around, the more chance you have of being shot. But it's not a huge problem. It's just one of those things you've got to practice and get used to, basically. And the last thing is that versus Sledge, he's very, very loud. He has a gun to do his destruction. Sledge has a hammer, and the hammer's quite quiet. You can use the hammer from, you know, I'd say beyond 15 meters, you're not really going to hear it unless you're properly listening out for it. And so he's very good for getting people in the building quietly, whereas Buck, with that gun, generally speaking, you're going to hear it. So he's not quite as stealthy, unfortunately. Tips for making the most of Buck. 1-2 punch holes. So what I mean by this is go for a shot that is kind of, if you're talking about operator heights, you'd be aiming for the chest. Now, hip fire when you're using Buck, you want to be not too close to the wall, because if you go too close, then you're making a hole that's maybe not big enough to be used. And if you're too far away, you're maybe just going to be making those small pellet holes that I was telling you about earlier. So you've got to be in this kind of perfect distance. I don't have it quantified, but it's something that you'll pick up with instinct, and you'll see it when I'm playing in the gameplay in the background. You'll see when I've got the distances right, and you'll see when I've got it wrong. It's easy to make that mistake. It's not something that you're always going to be bang on with, but to minimize the effects of the range being a sort of dodginess factor, just give it 1 to the chest and 1 to the knees, and that way you're going to have something that's hopefully clear on the floor, so you don't have any studs getting in the way when you're wanting to walk through, and also clear on the top so that you're able to walk through without your head bumping. What you don't want to do with Buck necessarily is try to go for vaultable holes in the way that you would with a Sledge hit if you were going to be standing when you use the hammer. Because if you do try and use that sort of hole, the walls have a bad habit of breaking just that little bit more down the bottom, to where the space that you would actually have to vault is sometimes very restricted and the prompt won't always appear. So it's better to make it walkable rather than vaultable. Crouchable's fine, obviously. I'd recommend crouching with Sledge and Buck. But Buck, because he can do his destruction so quickly, it's not so bad if you want to double tap and then go through. But obviously if you're trying to keep it stealthy, just crouch, shoot straight in front of you. You should be fine to go out without any problems. If you are kind of done with all your work through the drone phase and you think, okay, I know exactly what I need to do, I'm going to enter through this bit and then I need to clear this roamer or that roamer or this position, whatever. Remember, you don't have to use doors because you can create your own. I think it's one of those things that's easy to forget, is that your gadget has so many charges that you can just use it whenever you really want, and as a roamer it makes it a lot more difficult to defend the position when there are multiple options for the attackers to take to get to me. So if I'm seeing a wall, let's take billiards in Coastline. If you're in billiards in Coastline and you're standing around about the aqua door, and all of a sudden hookah wall gets destroyed, but you also hear people walking around the double door that leads into a VIP hallway, that's a bad situation, because in that situation you don't know what to pick and you might not pick the right cover. If you decide to push the double door, you're then isolated for anyone who comes through hookah, and it's just more to think about, more to put pressure on people and hopefully catch them off guard. So make sure you do create your own holes, create your own entryways with the shotgun when you're going in. If you're doing ceiling work, you want to make sure that you drone the place that you're actually going to have to stand to do the ceiling work. The last thing you want to do is to be focused staring up at the ceiling and then you get shot by someone who was standing there the whole time that you just didn't notice because your focus is up top. You want that assurance that you've got a little bit of clearance in time for you to get your job done and then get out of there. The biggest example I can think of for this is if you're trying to go into border and you're entering through the double door underneath armory lockers. So often you see people who get killed by someone who's just run down the main stairs, who's come from customs, who's come from the customs hallway, who's come out of vents, who's come out of servers. There's loads and loads of options for people to come in and intercept you when you're doing that job. So get your eyes in with the drone early doors and make sure that you're clear, get your job done quickly, get out of there. And it also helps nowadays, now that you can ping gadgets, if you are starting out with this, get your teammates to ping the gadget that you need to destroy through the floor, because that way there's no guessing, there's no shoot open the ceiling enough so that I can see and then take out the gadget. At least that way you know for sure this is where it's going to be, and then obviously it will become muscle memory soon enough because you'll remember the positions that the gadget's going to be placed in, generally speaking. When you're stuck up close, you run out of ammo in your C8 SFW, or if you're just feeling like you're not confident enough to use the gun up close, or you have a really long range scope or whatever it is, you can use the shotgun. It's not a bad option. Obviously outside of that close range it's going to struggle compared to other shotguns, but it's still doable. You still have 6 rounds, it has a fast reload, and if you're completely stuck and the shotgun doesn't do the job, you can always just swap quickly. The thing is, it's literally just a tap. You hit that gadget button again, you're back onto the shotgun, you're back onto the main gun. It really doesn't take long at all, and you just got to make sure that you're paying attention to what one you're using at what time and taking your ranges into consideration. Just think, if I'm going to be engaging someone up close, maybe I would be more comfortable using the shotgun. So there's your options there. Consider using the laser sight. I'm not a big fan of laser sights in general because I know many times I've had my life saved in terms of moving into an angle because the person who's been holding the angle has been using a laser sight, and so I've just gone, well, I don't need to push that then because they're actively waiting for me to turn this corner and they could be in any number of places. I know that he's watching me. But it does improve the spread of your shotgun and it does make it a bit more lethal at distance. The only thing I would say in regards to this is that it also will completely throw off your knowledge and understanding of the way the shotgun is going to destroy the wall. Because as soon as you change that spread, it changes the way that it behaves, it changes the way that it destroys things, and it can sometimes actually hinder you because it makes holes that are just too small to be functional if you're in the wrong distances. So consider that, but if you want to use it more as a weapon rather than a breaching tool, which it wouldn't be my first choice, but I know there are people who do that. That's definitely the way that he was played when he was first released, because they actually gave it really bad breaching capability, but made it very good as a shotgun. It was just the best the best semi-auto shotgun in the game at the time. But if you do want to use that playstyle, consider using the laser sight just to make it a bit more viable for that particular thing. If you want to clear out a hatch very quickly and easily, my best recommendation is to have the top of the crosshair on a corner and the bottom of the crosshair on the opposite corner. So you shoot corner to corner, it should break pretty easily because you're then taking out enough of the beams that it's not going to be an issue. Sometimes if you're shooting straight along or straight across, it can be finicky and it can make a hole and you have to shoot it twice. The more ammo you can preserve, the better, because you never know when you're going to need it. So corner to corner, that's my recommendation. And kind of get yourself in a position where you're close enough that you would make one of the big holes in a horizontal wall, and that's when you'll have an indication of whether or not you've actually got it right, and you'll obviously see based off whether or not the hatch goes down in one shot. If you want to maximise your destruction, I mentioned it before, watch those ranges. I don't have numbers to give to you, unfortunately. I just never really figured it out for myself, honestly. It was more a feeling that you get. You'll see it based off of the way that the crosshair is looking on the space that you're in and the way that it reacts. You know, it's just one of those things. You have to play them, you have to see what it feels like, you have to realise the differences between the different materials, the way that they interact with the shotgun. You'll find a lot of the time that if you're shooting wood, there will be more destruction than you expected, and it will actually splinter off in places that are maybe not positive for you. Whereas with plaster, it tends to be the opposite. You don't get as much destruction as you would have hoped. So just try it out and watch those ranges, and remember those ranges once you've got it dialed in, and it will become muscle memory, as I say. So I already mentioned moving around and trying to clear roamers by basically taking the fight to them and causing problems for them by making holes in walls that they otherwise wouldn't expect to have holes in. But you want to keep in mind also that you should be droning those spots, and this doesn't just apply to attacking roamers, this obviously also applies to attacking sites. It's always best to have information of what's going to be waiting for you on the other side of the wall, rather than just rolling the dice and potentially finding that someone knew you were coming and then they take your head off and you've done nothing to assist the team, you've done nothing to make yourself feel better, and you've done nothing to give yourself a nice afternoon on Rainbow Six Siege. So get those drones out, use them, be happy that you used them, and just remember, when you're off site, pretty much everything is unlikely to be reinforced. So sometimes it's just not a bad idea to just get a little bit of wanton destruction. Because why not? You're the angle master. You are the hole creator. The door maestro. Carver. Anyway, you make things. Entrances. So go forth into the world, my lads. Enjoy yourselves. And I hope that Buck is more tangible and less difficult for you to play, having watched this video. Thank you very much for tuning in again, and I will see you in the next video. Ados vidania, everybody.